Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
Sound good?
Yes, sir! I know who I am!
Did IQs just drop shot?
That could have been
I have a plan. I like this shit.
You know, it's exciting.
Dance off, bro.
It is your
Me and you.
Welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast.
Let the games begin.
Hello and welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast with Jason and Lee. I'm Jason.
I'm Lee.
And today we're going to be discussing, which is going to probably be the swan song for Hugh Jackman, the film that is Logan, final chapter in the Wolverine trilogy.
I can't believe it's an actual trilogy. They made a trilogy of it. That's only dawning on me now.
Cool, but before we get to the film, I want to know how my co-host Lee is doing. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. Got a new, the new Legend of Zelda game came out on Friday, so it's been stealing my time. I've been absolutely playing the hell out of it. I posted things to like Big Picture Reviews on Twitter because like I knew that was what I was spending time on, and although we don't do game coverage or anything like that, it's still something that I spend a lot of time in my life considering and reading up on. So I feel like I have to say I have to put in a word for it at some point, like every now and then, just
cool.
Like, by the way, this is a part of my life, a significant part of my life. I just don't review it because I'd be a terrible game critic. Because I have a very, very low bar for entry. I play almost anything and typically have little to nothing to say regarding whether it's a good or a bad game. Anyway, having a great time with that new game, and it's been making me very lazy towards going out and actually watching films. I'd be like, yeah, I just want to lie in for a while, I'll probably see something later today or tomorrow.
Have you been caught up in the buzz for the Switch? What console do you have for playing
Zelda? I got the Wii U.
Okay.
I think the Switch is a cool looking console and all. It's just I can't afford it quite clearly, and also there's some things about its online charges and stuff that I don't agree with, so I'm very hesitant about that whole console changeover thing. Plus, after the Wii U, which was not a particularly successful or interesting console, which I liked, but
I sold mine.
Yeah.
That's how bad I thought it was, because I played Batman Arkham City. I loved that game, but then when I went out to actually try to rent games, because that's, I was still renting games at that point.
Yeah.
There was nothing to rent. I used to try to go play with my daughters, and they'd never found anything interesting. They were like, can we play this? And I was like, what the hell is that? We'd rent it, they'd play for 15 minutes, get bored, and then we were like, we're stuck with it for 24 hours or 3 days. I don't remember how long we had. But yeah.
I've got a good run out of mine, but I consider it my niche purchase. But a niche is a niche. I'm not going to, I'm not a subscriber to Nintendo. I'm not just going to pick up the next one just because the new ones come out. I've got a PS4. I just like my Wii U, and then this Zelda game came out on it as well, and I was like, well, I like Zelda. Let's play this, and it turned out to be great. So yeah, what can I do?
Anyhow, let's see. How am I doing this week? I'm good. I finally managed to watch, I watched the Oscars.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I didn't have much to do that night. I wanted to see how Jimmy Kimmel was going to be. He actually turned out to be a fun host.
That's good.
I managed to watch Moonlight, which I really liked. As I said on the last show, I was gearing up to watch Moonlight, and I actually did, and I really, really had a great time, and I'm glad that it won Best Picture because it's an added bonus for publicity for them, because I feel like it's a very good film.
Yeah, absolutely. It is great for what it wants to do, and a very deserving winner, which is it feels good to say when it comes to the Oscars, because there's always the hesitation they'll give it to the wrong one. So
you mean La La Land?
Yeah. So specifically in this case, it could have been La La Land, and they almost did. That to me, I expected, but I'm glad it went the other way, because if I wanted one of the two, it was between Moonlight and Manchester by the Sea, and I was just happy for either to win. Happy with that.
Right, but I actually managed to watch La La Land as well, and I liked the third act. The first two acts, everything was uneven to me. Ryan Gosling was not particularly good in the film either. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, and I don't like Damien Chazelle as a director. Even like the third act, that final part of the third act was like literally lifted from Jacques Demy's Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and I was like, what? Why do we have to be not original anymore? Why do we have to constantly be nodding to other films? Just felt a little bit weird. As lovely as it looked, I was like,
Yeah, I mean, can you truly get points for just recreating a scene? It does seem a little weird. Yeah, I know. I have a lot of the same hesitations with La La Land. It's generally all around, I think it was a perfectly watchable film. And I did like the performances. I get what you mean. There's nothing particularly special about Ryan Gosling's performance. But and so I do question his actual nomination. But at the same time, there's a part that he was to play, and he played the part as was to be played. So I think, it's credit for just doing the job that you had to do. Nothing extraordinary about it.
You learn how to play the piano, you learn how to dance, you learn how to... I get it,
There is something about the performance of it that does warrant attention, but I don't know, I guess maybe it's how we look at the Oscars, that we come to expect something like a moment in the film where we go like, whoa, that's acting. And maybe that's a problem more than with how we look at Oscar nominees than it is to do with Ryan Gosling training for a role, actually performing the role well, and doing just a good job in a role that suits him,
Right.
I would have given it to him for the Nice Guys, preferably.
much better performance.
Definitely.
You're absolutely right. I think that was great. One thing that I still haven't gotten a response for, and I won't get a response for, is I tweeted out to Scott Mantz because he was really, really, really rooting for La La Land to win, and he was constantly fighting for it. A huge supporter for La La Land, and I tweeted out to him, why La La Land, where it's actually a hyper-real version of what romanticism is and how Hollywood portrays love stories, as opposed to Manchester by the Sea, Moonlight, and also, what was the other one? Hell or High Water, that actually does speak about the human condition in the society we live in, where I feel that that's what cinema is supposed to be about. As opposed to kind of avoiding the real questions.
Yeah.
As a film like La La Land actually does. We're going to just sing and dance about it, but we're not going to really attack the issues.
Exactly. It's one of those things. I think people just want variety in the Oscars, and I'm all for that. I think that not every film has to... I mean, like Moonlight, Hell or High Water, and Manchester by the Sea are all demure, slow-paced, not very accessible movies. La La Land is very accessible.
Okay.
And so I argue that there has to be a place there for those kind of films. I only argue that La La Land itself is flawed in what La La Land wants to be.
Right.
And that's why I think it's not the greatest movie. I think that for what it was trying to do, it actually missteps a number of times in its own ambition. But when it comes to the Oscar scene, then we have to contend a film that literally couldn't be further away from the point of all the other films. It gains notoriety for standing out. It's the poppy fun choice, and I would be for that almost in most cases. Like last year I wanted Mad Max to win, and I mean that's ludicrous. It was never going to happen, but like it was the fun one. So I wanted that over Spotlight and The Revenant. I wanted that to be the one, but what can you do?
Well, I guess that sums it up. Anyway, shall we move on from La La Land's flaws to Logan's claws?
No. I just want to do a Logan yell. It's like, ah!
Anyway, so we'll be back after this. Stay tuned.
Every week on Real Spoilers, what we do is we take that week's big release on the weeks that we guess right, and we spoil it for you. So if you saw a movie and you want to talk about it with your friends, but maybe you don't have any friends, we can be your friends in podcast form. We'll talk about the movie in rich, vibrant detail, and it's kind of like a book club for movies.
Yeah, we're just a bunch of movie nerds.
Yeah, and so it's just a long-form conversation about the movie, going through its plot, talking about what worked, and a lot of times what didn't, and making fun of it when it doesn't work. And if you like the show, feel free to share it on your Facebook, social media, Twitter, verse, thing, stuff. So that's what we do on Real Spoilers. It's like a book club for movies, only with less Oprah.
Hi everyone, this is Tim Costa.
I'm Hermano de Silva.
And this is Walter Vinci.
And together we are the First Time Watchers Podcast.
Each week we choose a movie to review that none of us has seen.
Watch it together.
And then discuss.
These movies could be new.
Or old.
Or on our list of shame.
You can find us on iTunes by searching for the First Time Watchers Podcast.
As well as on Stitcher.
And we love interacting with our listeners, so if you have any suggestions, send us a tweet.
An email.
Or post to our Facebook page.
We'd love to hear from you.
That's right. I mean, it's all about interaction.
And talking about what we love, movies.
And you don't have to worry about us going on and on about this and that and the other. And let's talk about this minutiae here.
Shut up.
And I wonder who the cat can
God damn it, shut up!
I think that's enough, Walter.
My God.
Go by during the credits.
Quiet.
Logan, what did you do?
Charles, the world is not the same as it was. Mutants. They're gone now.
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real.
What is she?
Beneath the stain
She's like you.
Of time,
Very much like you.
the feelings disappear.
She needs our help.
You are
Someone will come along.
Someone has come along.
I am still right here. And you could have it all. My empire of dirt. I will let you down. I will make you hurt. I will keep myself. I would find a way.
Logan, you still have time.
All right, so welcome back. We hope you guys enjoyed the first trailer. I decided to play the first trailer for Logan because the Johnny Cash song, I think, it really captured the tone, I think, that James Mangold was going for.
Absolutely.
You know, the whole melancholy aspect, you know, a very dour tone that Logan actually has throughout the entire film.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, the film stars Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Richard E. Grant, Boyd Holbrook, Stephen Merchant, Eric LaSalle, Soul Glow himself.
Of course.
And it's actually introducing Daphne Keane, the young X-23 who was stellar in this.
Incredible,
movie.
absolutely. What a like, for a child performance.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. It's like what's her name? Millie Bobby Brown.
Yeah.
Very powerful young girl, you know, who's going to turn into this really intense
I'm
character.
glad the way society is going, we're getting a lot more indignant, violent little girls as characters. That's
definitely.
That's hilarious. Totally for this trend.
Yeah, Leslie pointed it out too. She says, "I like the fact that it's a girl and she kicks ass."
Yeah,
it's too bad I can't show Logan to my daughters because of the how
horrible violence.
No, I think my daughters would actually dig it. I don't know. What do you think, Les? Should we show Logan to the girls? There's tits in it, but I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Oh yeah.
Why would we show
2
people
seconds.
getting decapitated and not show boobs? It's like a half a second, right?
They'd be like, it's disgusting. And
Yeah, exactly. That my daughters are like that. It was like, we saw her boobs. That's stupid. And then we'd move on. So I might actually show Logan to my daughters because I'm a responsible father. Anyway, I think they're gonna really love X-23. I really think they're gonna really dig Laura as a character. Anyway, before we get to all the performances and things like that, I want to say, first off, this is going to be a spoiler-heavy review like we always do, and it's actually not a review,
right.
It's a discussion. So spoilers. Obviously, we're going to be getting right into it, as we normally do, so this is your warning now. If you guys don't want any spoilers for the film, go and watch it, come back and listen to us a little bit later. We don't mind. We just want a little bit of feedback from you guys, or just click play, let it play out, plug your ears, and then come back and play it again and give us an extra play. It's going to be great.
It all works out for us. Put it that way.
And I'm coming into this review or this look at Logan. I can't say that this is going to be in depth for me because I saw the film yesterday. I usually like to give myself a little bit more time before processing a film.
Yeah, it's very much first impressions at this point.
There you go. That's what I was looking for. This is going to be my initial reaction to the film more than and what I usually like to do is really dig deep into it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be going as in depth as I normally like to go because I'm still processing the film. There was a lot to take in, a lot of stuff that I didn't like about the film. It's not even about the film. I think it's what it says about cinema and where it's headed. And I was kind of a little bit annoyed by it. But I can't say that this is a bad film.
The film has very little to do with your initial criticisms.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah. I was like, it's just society in general is pissing me off. And I'm taking it out on Logan, poor fucking movie.
Yeah, just all it wanted to be was a sad X-Men film, and you're like, fuck this guy. Where's it get off in a sad X-Men film? Yeah. I mean, like, to me, the superhero films that we cover on the show are usually more relaxed atmospheres anyway, so
right.
I haven't gone essay form on this one either. I've got a few things that I thought were interesting that I'll want to talk about. I won't be as angry. Since I usually don't mull things over as much as Jason anyway, this is just going to be a normal episode for me.
What I'm basically trying to say is that I'm going to try to have a decent conversation about it, because I know that a film like Logan deserves multiple viewing.
Yeah.
Because the element of surprise that I went through in the choices that these guys made, I didn't agree with everything that they did, but at the same time, I think that what Mangold did was the responsible choices. Now that the initial viewing is out of it, I'll be able to go back to being myself and really try to break it down the way it's meant to be broken down.
Yeah.
But initial reactions was more a question of why did they go in this direction? But before we get to that, I want to go a little bit towards you. So Lee, what did you think of Logan? Initial reactions.
Yeah, let's do it. I liked it. As general as I can be, I thought it was a fairly good film, a pretty good X-Men film. On top of that, it's not just a good film. It was a pretty good X-Men film, and then, but it's also, in my eyes, particularly flawed and a little misguided. And you do have to question some of the choices they made, as you were saying. I don't think that's just initial viewing thing. I think a lot of this will stick, but overall, it's very easy to just say, I recommend Logan, and I do. I'll easily say to anybody, if they want to watch a good X-Men film, Logan's a good one, and tackles maybe too much, but it does tackle something at least. When I think about over-interpreting the film, and the long haul about thinking back on it, I glaze over, I lose a little more interest. I don't think it holds up particularly well under scrutiny, and I'll probably get into some of that. But generally, yeah, I've got some good things to say and bad things to say. It's going to be a little mixed, but it's not quite Suicide Squad.
Oh, definitely not. I agree with you. My initial reaction was one of, I liked the film, but I was extremely bored by it as well.
Sure.
Because I feel like we were retreading old ground. You know, as much as people are saying that this is a very new take and a very important film, I have to kind of disagree with that. I'm going to like this movie for what it presents, because if we look at the overall X-Men franchise, is this a film that took a lot of risks? I don't think so. I think it actually is a lot. It is very much a superhero film.
It's not just a very much a superhero film. It's very much an X-Men film. It's right in there. It's just the next logical step to me. I think that Logan has exactly its place in the structure we've seen to date, and to me it makes a lot of sense that this is the film that came out just now, and follows up the films that we've seen before. I mean, The Wolverine was just edging towards exactly this kind of sad introspective material,
right.
And Days of Future Past gets into a lot of the shock death kind of angle to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take the other element that was in Apocalypse, where we see Wolverine just going nuts on people. And you've pretty much got all the elements you need to make Logan sitting in the previous films. Yeah, so now they've just sort of distilled it a little. And that's fine. That makes it a perfectly good interpretation of the X-Men legacy.
Yeah.
As its own film, with all those parts, does its narrative really do a lot of interesting things? Yes and no.
I wholeheartedly agree with the yes and no aspect. Does it really try to break molds? I think that it's disguised very well.
Yeah,
the same things that it's already done before. It's not as iconoclastic as everybody's saying it is. You know, It reshuffles the cards of what the superhero films can do, but it's still playing within the same deck.
Yeah, that's a smart little way of saying it, definitely.
I think that what's fun is that they've shifted in terms of what the message is, right? We were talking just before the show, and I mean, I picked up on it. This is the one thing that I was like, yay, I'm happy they're doing this, but I was also disappointed because this is where it's pointing us for cinema to come. Yeah. And at once I was like, okay, they've shifted the commentary on gay rights that the original X-Men franchise was doing, and they shifted it towards what we were discussing a little bit earlier in terms of immigration and refugees.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I feel like it's catering to a problem that is being dealt with in a reactive nature as opposed to a proactive nature, which means that this is a possible future that we're heading towards in Logan, but it could have been avoided. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so I think a lot of the reaction that I'm getting back, and this is what's kind of getting me a little bit angry right now. I think that my main problem isn't with the film itself, but it's with the culture in which it was spawned. I think that the way that it's shaped right now speaks volumes as to how backward thinking big parts of the US actually are. For the world to be in 2017 right now and race and sexuality to still be an issue is really boring to me. And I understand that some people might see that as entitlement and I'm looking down on this, and it's not. I understand these issues need to be talked about, but we've been doing it for such a long time that I don't understand. I think for me it's just a question of I don't understand why nothing has changed. I think it's my pure disappointment in people and not in Logan.
I think that's perfectly fair. I'm often very disappointed in people as well, en masse.
So, with Trump's election, cinema's going to go back to a way it was like post-Vietnam or post-9/11. We haven't moved on. I see it as a sign of not wanting to get better because it sells tickets. You know what I mean?
Right.
And as good as Logan is, I don't see it as a film like that's promising a bright future for superhero films. I see it as a symptom of the times. I see it as a step towards the sad state of films are going to be like in the next 4 years. Sure. And as I said, I think that people are reactive in nature, and I can't hold that against Mangold himself. But just after seeing Logan, I was like, oh man, haven't we had 14 years of dystopian fucking cinema? Like a lot of people are saying, this is the movie we need.
Yeah.
This is the movie we need. The same way that they talked about in terms of Arrival, it's the movie we need. We need to communicate.
Said about La La Land as well. Every film is the movie we need, apparently.
Exactly. But I don't think that it's the movie that you need. It's the leaders that are missing right now.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. You're kind of taking apart how people at the moment are interpreting Logan as a symbol of where we're heading. In a post-Trump world, and that to me that makes sense as a criticism because that's what we're surrounded with right now. That's what a lot of our contemporaries are getting at, and I think that's a little premature of them to jump in on that end and think that that's even remotely a sound argument in what this film was going for. I mean, like, let's put it this way. So when we're talking about the migrant story that this film is telling, okay, so that in itself is about Logan taking in this girl Laura and at the time her sort of surrogate mother figure, and they're going to essentially they're going to go north and cross the border because that's the only place they're going to be safe. The place where they live at the moment is literally hunting them down. So this is something that has never gone away and is never really probably ever going to go away. People running for their lives from countries, that's prominent, especially today. That's a very, very relevant subject for this film to get into. So yeah, exactly. That people are taking it in a post-Trump direction. To me, that's the leap in expectation. That's the wrong direction.
To be fair, they're taking Mangold at his word. He said that definitely the campaigns and all that stuff had an influence in how they were writing the film. I would love it if people would actually look at it as a film about family more than anything else, right? If people are talking about Fast and the Furious about family and things like that, I think if Logan could be anything, it would be to embrace the dysfunctionality of how families are. That. In the end, even if we're alone, we're never really alone. Even if you die alone, you're not necessarily dying alone. A lot of people have that very somber way of looking at life and death and how regret plays into it and how guilt plays into it. And I think that this film deals with those things on a much higher level than a lot of films that have come out this year as well. I mean, if you look at how guilt is affected in Manchester by the Sea, I could actually say, well, listen, if you're looking for a more pulpy version of the same message, watch Logan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Watch Logan. And I think that would be interesting. The fact that Logan feels that guilt, the fact that Professor X feels that guilt. Professor X, apparently, it's kind of hinted at that he might have been the guy who killed the people at the school, Logan switches the channel on the radio and he might have actually killed a bunch of X-Men. The same way as Casey Affleck's character burned down his house in Manchester by the Sea.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So you have these different aspects of guilt, and one that's going to be very real context, and another one that's going to be in a very superhero context.
That's funny, yeah. These films, this is where cinema is, and that this is the themes that are constantly popping up at this point. It makes sense that people are leaping to this and crowding around the idea that the world we live in right now is particularly shit, especially America. Everybody, they just want old values to survive in a way that feels relevant, and they want that sense of belonging they used to have. And of course, people are going to read that if the election was so in the middle regarding that you're essentially looking at a split country in America, then of course they feel like they've lost their family. That's their nationalism torn apart. The people now feel like they don't know their neighbor. That kind of ties in. You could read that as the contextual reading. Within the year that Logan came out was the year Manchester by the Sea came out. The familial is being burned behind them, and everybody's just pushing into this somber world and just trying to get their head down and get on with it, and nothing's getting better. I get that. That adds some flavor to this. It's when people saying this is a direct reaction to Trump's America or some sort of apocryphal take on what's going to happen. That, as you said, reactionary. That to me...
Yes, because what would have happened had Hillary won? It would have changed the entire discourse. And the movie was being made
the film still came out.
Exactly. And what would they have been saying at this point? That's the conversation I'd love to have. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
No, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Cool.
Reactionary-wise, we are so quick to bounce straight to what's relevant today and see it as the reflection of what this film was in its making. But this film was made months and months ago and came out today. It came out in this month, in 2017. People are obviously going to reflect, this is Trump's America and stuff like that. But it's just general. It's far more general than that, and it's more important that we look at the general and learn from it in the message that it's trying to preach in a general sense than it is about taking the very specific. Because what happens if, yes, Trump gets overthrown? The migrant issue's gone. No, it isn't. Of course it isn't. Trump isn't. He's barely touched on it. It's been happening the entire time. Migrants since. You can go back to any World War II story and you'll see the exact same issue, and it's only still relevant today because of things like Syria and people trying to get out of the country that is now torn apart. Everybody is trying to tackle the migrant story. That makes sense. That's fine. And it's fine for Logan to switch tact and discuss it as well. And it's taking another look at those who suffer under prejudice. That's what X-Men do. That's their role. Their world is always full of prejudice. And they reflect the stories of the people there. So we usually get stories about race, and we usually get stories about sexuality. This time, it just happens to be a little more on the nose when it came out that this is about the migrants. But this story, I bet, is in an X-Men comic somewhere, and it's actually a surprise it's taken this long to really get a film version where the world is informed by a push for a border as some sort of insight to hope. That's surprising X-Men has taken this long to get to that story, because that's such a clear direction for them to go when it comes to representing the people who get shit upon by people, and suffer hard times. X-Men, they find unity in telling stories, people suffering, because then we can relate to them. That's it. Logan fits the bill as an X-Men film for that exact reason. It's just like this is the film I need right now. It's so short-sighted. And I feel that kind of misses a lot. Because, it doesn't talk even about what Logan does perfectly with the refugee story it tells. Because even though the pieces are there, it doesn't mean shit if you don't actually take it somewhere interesting. What was interesting about how this film tackles the migrant story is that it's open-ended. The finale of the movie, we never see those children really safe. We never see the optimism, the cause that Logan in this film dies for is to get these children across to another life, and we could see that as he's the boat taking the people to America.
Very good. The boat he talks about throughout the film.
Exactly. He becomes that image that he wanted for himself for selfish reasons. He is now becoming the useful, practical migrant, the boat that takes the immigrants to America,
Very good.
But what's especially brilliant about the way that this ends, and I think it's full of praise with Logan, is that by not seeing those children actually safe in the country they go to, it shows how this is this is always a problem, and X-Men are not in the position to comment on this is a happily ever after. They can only say that this is what these people want, and that surely somewhere else is better than where they are. But if you actually then look at where these people go in real life, a lot of them, they get turned around, they live a life of prejudice against them, they look different from the people that they live with, they are now rejected in society. These people don't always live happily ever afters. Logan doesn't pretend like that's what happens. It just says they get across. It says that they make it. Maybe we don't even see them make it across the line. We just see them run into a forest, and that's them on their way to the next step. To me, that's great. That's a great way. I would praise a non-superhero film for taking that step. I would say that's big of a film to know when to draw the line in general, and for Logan to know when its limit is in trying to push its message.
Right.
I think that's incredible. The metaphor of these kids getting across the border, it feels like it's actually saying something for once. It feels big enough to actually let the story speak for itself, and that's better. That's smarter, and I feel that that's something people are not picking up on when we're talking about its contextual relevance. Is that there's no happy ending. This is still postmodernism. This is no fairy tale. This is still a pretty dark, somber story that ends miserably for everyone. And that's huge for a superhero film to do that, be sentimental about the character, it's, the past it's letting go on the way, but look at the future and go, well, is it getting better? That fits what it's trying to do. I hugely promote its ability to tell that story in the confines of a superhero narrative. I think that's great writing.
And I'll agree with that, because the thing that I picked up, and that's why I mentioned family earlier. Yeah. I feel like this is more of a family picture.
Yeah.
A father-son relationship, a father with relation to his daughter. Even even on the villain side, if you will. You'll have the notion of living up to what your father has done before.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, you'll have what's his name? Xander Rice having to live up to his father's experiments. Dale Rice in the comic books, and I feel like what you were talking about being that boat that ferries the people into a promised land or a brighter future. I feel that is quintessential in trying to vehicle a message of hope, because in this case, you'll have Wolverine, who becomes the father of the future of mutants.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually just trying to keep Laura alive, the same way as Professor X tried to do his best to be a father to Logan. And they essentially keep each other together because they're the last things that they have. Because in the end, that's exactly what it is. Your family is essentially the last thing that you have. When all your friends are gone, people get caught up in what is life. You'll eventually have to boil down to, and who can you reach out to? You'll reach out to family. And I think that is
great.
The better message, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. I mean, if you look at the middle of the second act, when they're actually at the farmhouse, where they actually come into contact with a family that they've helped, and then they actually give them food in return, which is essentially the way people are supposed to be. God damn it.
Yeah.
Just being nice, but the world keeps going by. I mean, those trucks, those driverless trucks that are on the highway don't stop for shit, which is essentially what life is. Life doesn't stop for you. It doesn't stop. You're going to get hit by it. You got to avoid it. There are certain things that are there, and I think that Mangold's visual metaphors there work very, very well. And I think that it's interesting when Professor X says that he has had the best night of sleep that he's had in such a long time, and he doesn't feel like he deserves it. I was a little bit mixed on that, because you are constantly self-critical about who you are as an individual as you move on through life. I, as a person, will always try to be a better father than my father was to my children. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we fail left and right constantly. We're constantly making mistakes. We're like, oh, there's damage that I've inflicted on this thing. I could have handled that better. The same way as Professor X could have handled Logan better, the same way Logan could have handled himself better and could have handled Laura better, But the fact that they meet this family, and I'm positive that we're only looking at it from an outside perspective and like, oh, that looks pretty cool. But they've got their problems, They're dealing with the other fucking morons that are cutting off the water. They're dealing with the horses that are just going all over the place. They're stuck in the middle of all this as well, and they're trying to make it work. Which is why I thought it was kind of an interesting aspect that they had chosen a black family,
right,
so that they could have these mutants relating to something of people like this that actually went through civil rights. And this is 2029, so I think that they were probably the kids of people that went through the civil rights movement and the counterculture and all that stuff. So, I mean, to have it go full circle in Logan, where you're actually having people being persecuted for being quote unquote different, I was like, I understand there's a reflection there, but I wanted it to, I think that's why it made me a little bit sad, where I was like, we've come full circle. We're going back to something we've already been to. And it's sad for me that humanity is where it is right now at this point in time. So I feel like the overall message that Mangold was trying to send in Logan is, and that's why the cross is there at the end, was like, and this is very Christian, but I feel like it was maybe a little bit too much on the nose, where Jesus says, like, love one another as I have loved you. You guys are all part of the big ass family. And then when Laura puts the X down, where Logan is, well, spoiler alert again, Logan dies, where he was the X-Man, he becomes the martyr, the Jesus figure that actually helped. Dude, you're going just a little bit too far.
I agree. It does. I mean, this is still X-Men. This is huge. It's bombastic. It's melodramatic, and this imagery, while I thought was affecting in the way because I cared about this, it was a great symbol for Logan. Like, yes. As his grave, for it to be marked by the X, and that when you're thinking, yes, he's gone, but he had his place. He was an X-Man. That was who he became, and that's where he found his family. So that he reunites with them, like you were saying, in that sort of way. That's a touching character resolution.
Right.
But when you consider what else the film's trying to do, and this is a problem with much of the film, when you compare that to what you've seen and the other threads that are going on. Including things like Logan taking on his doppelganger, which is supposed to be some sort of metaphor for his internal struggle,
right?
And then the way that kills Xavier. So we see some sort of dynamic between the two of them, where the Xavier's failures have manifested themselves and killed him. If we're looking at that kind of stuff, and then we're looking at the story that sees the tragic end to a character, this film is trying to do too much. And when you try to watch it with just generally, you're getting mixed messages, left, right, and center. And it's because it doesn't flow as a functional piece together, and that is a problem. The migrant story is a good one. It's a really good one.
Yep.
But not for Logan. Not for Logan's story. While the family aspects work, Logan's introspection doesn't work, and the way that the relationship between Xavier and Logan resolves, which is sad for the character side of things, it doesn't function with the migrant story in any informative way. If it does, we're reaching to a point where we're now trying to apologize for the movie. I feel, and I'm sure that's not to rule out that there could be some really great intentions behind what it's going for, but when I was doing this, I was seeing left, right, and center, all these different ideas flung at the screen and crossed
do you
wires.
Feel like that? Yeah. Do you feel like that because the film is actually, the three acts of the film are actually separated into different film genres?
It doesn't help itself as well in the execution.
Because, the first act is essentially the wanted man trope in Westerns. Cinema. And then you'll have the second act is going to be a road film.
Yeah, it's a road trip.
And then the third act is flat out X-Men.
Yeah. It's got its passing the torch and coming of age territory that X-Men always touches on, because we usually follow these mutants who are just trying to find themselves. We always have this identity story, and that's what the third one is, trying to finally come to peace with who you are. That's an X-Men story through and through, and it has nothing to do with the road trip, and that again has little to do with the Western send-up of the beginning. It's a disjointed film, and when you start mixing the signals that all those different film styles meshed with the different stories that they're trying to tell, all with the different layers, it doesn't. I don't think it adds up to something fulfilling for any particular angle. You piece it piece by piece, it's fine, but altogether, there's too much going on, and it's trying to achieve too much at the one time.
I agree. Because that's it. A lot of people are saying that this is a flat out, this is a Western. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not a Western at all.
No.
It's a subgenre of the Western called revisionist Western, right? And you'll have plenty of films. Maybe it's because this is 2017, and when we talk Westerns, most people are going to look back to the Man with No Name trilogy with Clint Eastwood and stuff like that. But those were revisionist in their own way. What I'm talking about revisionist, we're talking about like darker, the idea that the beast has to become a beast in order to become the hero, which essentially what Logan goes through. If you look at a film like Unforgiven, which is also a revisionist Western, which I think that a lot of what Mangold is doing is also taking from, and I'll cite all the references right now of where, as much as Mangold said he was inspired by Shane, I think the fact that he put it in the film was to distract people from all the other fucking movies.
All the other ones, yeah, exactly.
Because this film really relies on Children of Men. Alfonso Cuarón's film, I think from 2005, where, you'll have this woman, the world is in a bleak place where there haven't been any new births in the last 18 years. And the last guy that was born is celebrating his 18th birthday, but he gets killed on TV. And so now, spoiler alert again, you'll have Clive Owen, his character, that's going to find a pregnant woman, and he has to sneak her across the border to get to a boat to bring her to safety. I mean, come on, man, this is all over Logan. We're going to get a boat. We're going to go live on the ocean. And so, but then you'll also have, it's part Terminator 2, where you'll have the X-24, which is X-24 is the T-1000, and you'll have the broken down old shitty Logan, which is the T-600.
Even the family dynamic on the road trip is Terminator 2. We've got Arnie is Wolverine. We've got John Connor is Laura. We've got Xavier as Sarah Connor. Everybody's a different fragment of this family fighting to try to just piece themselves together as they move forward through a shitty world. Yeah. Heading to a shittier time. You know?
Actually having to re-up in Mexico before going back into the US.
Exactly. They're the bastion of hope for humanity, or in this case, mutant kind. I mean, there's a huge parallel there, and then they introduce the clone, and then you're like, oh well, duh.
There you go. That's it. And I mean, I saw certain parallels that could be drawn with The Professional, Leon. You'll have that with the Natalie Portman character. Well, you have the old jaded assassin that has to take care of this little girl. Unforgiven, obviously, I think that there's a lot playing in there with William Money's character, Clint Eastwood's character, where he's drawn in one last time, and when he has to make peace with his violent past and go on this one last mission where he has to fucking annihilate an entire town and just blow off the fucking head. Gene Hackman was like, fuck you. This is what you want to see, the monster. Here's the monster. The same way as Jackman, actually, Logan drinks that green potion at the end, which is essentially Lance Armstrong steroids
again.
And just goes, exactly. So absolutely. I feel like, yes, Shane is there in terms of intention, but I think initially what my problem with a lot of what Mangold was doing is that this is a film I've seen before. I've seen this fucking movie. Even look at The Road, the film The Road with Viggo Mortensen is essentially drawing that on the post-apocalyptic thing. Absolutely. So I think that people just calling it a Western is reducing it to what everyone is also saying. It's like, there's a Western feel. Look at the color palette. It looks exactly like, a Sergio Leone film, Once Upon a Time in the West. I even looked up, and there's a little aspect of it that's called cattle punk, and it's actually a mix with that, where it's actually a futuristic dystopian world that's a commentary on the Twilight of the Old West genre, which is like the Old West coming to an end. But you'll have these characters that are going to kind of recuperate old values in order to combat the new looming threat, which is the modern world. And I thought that was kind of interesting because if you're blending sci-fi with the sub-Western genre of the revisionist Western, you're doing something better than what Cowboys and Aliens did.
That's what it's really all about. This has all been one build up to take a pot shot at everybody's least favorite film, Cowboys and Aliens.
There you go. And so I really think in this case, don't just call it a Western because it's set in that particular fucking location.
It's a Western. It's in a desert.
But I think that, it does recuperate a lot of the things. But I mean, like I said, the three acts are very different for me, where you'll have the Wanted Man, which is Laura and Professor X, both of them, right? That are essentially on separate sides of who Logan's personality is. You'll have the guilt that is written in Professor X, the idea that there's a lot of regret that comes with how he might have failed Logan, failed the X-Men, failed in his utopian dream of having man and mutant live together. And then you'll have Laura, which represents the hope of maybe recapturing the innocence of Xavier's dream later on. And then Logan being the person in the middle that was actually helped by Charles, and then bringing that message as the messenger, as Jesus was, and then giving it on to Laura, passing the baton like you were talking about as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you take everything that's going on in that movie, it's very difficult to say, okay, well, what the fuck? Where do I find myself? Which story do I want? Do I want to go with the Logan Jesus Savior thing?
Yeah, and there's something to be said about trying to make your film as concise as possible. Realistically, when you've got so many balls in the air, these thematic ideas that you're trying to weave into your story about a guy, this metal guy crossing the border with his kid, what you want to do is trim some of the excess. And I think that Logan's one of those films that kind of forgets to. It's very content to be as pumped full of crap as it can. I mean, like, baffling decisions like a mid-film fill-in switch, which adds nothing. The X-24 as a threat is almost nothing as well, you know? Like, and there's something to be said about the potential of maybe having swapped some of these out, or, I mean, like, I liked Donald.
Yeah, I didn't particularly like him.
Really? I liked his sleazy reaver performance. I thought that was I thought he was pretty fun, and I wanted to see him kind of get more threatening as the film came along. We've seen him as nice, but kind of tame guy who wasn't really putting up much of a fight. I wanted to see him kind of get more and more embroiled within the actual narrative, and to a point where we start to see him become a threat. Because I felt like we had set a good groundwork for him being the person who gets obsessed with finding Laura, you know?
Yeah, it's just he was monologuing at one point, you know, like fucking.
Speaking
villains.
of monologuing, fucking Xander, jeez, literally, in the film, Xander, before he gets shot by Logan, just rhymes off like his family heritage and the grand scheme he has for mutants and this future war thing that he's planning.
Shut the fuck up.
But it's like literally, it was funny, but it was literally a setup for an obvious move that they were going to just shoot him dead, and that was going to be that. And I felt like the longer it went on, it was taking the joke away from us. And it was long enough that I could turn to Maria, who watched it with me, and say, "You sly dog, you caught me monologuing," you know, from Incredibles.
Exactly.
You know? I just felt like so many decisions with that character and his part in the story had so little to do with it. Well, I mean, I get that thematically his father thing, it's relevant, but it's not interesting, and I don't think it enhances the story at all. I think, and that's the thing, this film was supposed to be something closer to a focused character outing with Wolverine getting the final send-up he wants. And to watch it blowed out to X-Men proportions to a 2.25 hour runtime, to just watch, there's literally like points in the plot where the story just stops because we need the villains to catch up. So they go to a casino while Logan finds a car because they can't just drive around a shitty car all day. Fine. But then they stop at a restroom on the side of the road for no reason. They stop with the family, and then I get what they wanted to do, but there was nothing natural in the writing that made that happen. You know, it's very much like, here's a scenario: Logan, Xavier, and Laura run into a family of normal people, and they see what life is like for normal people. But the fact that they're being hunted down ultimately gets these people killed. I get the concept. It was a fine concept. What happened was, it just feels wedged right into a random point in the film when we know that the villains are lagging behind enough that they're not really realistically with Caliban, another character who didn't need to be there. He's
I liked Caliban. I liked
him. I wish they had done something with him. He was nothing. He's no one in this film. He's a MacGuffin. He's a tool. And then it turns out they can find them anyway without him. So there was no point in him being around. They go on the film perfectly fine without any mention of him. To me, that means they didn't know how to write him out. There's a lot of moments like this where I'm just checking, like, I could see how the writers planned this film. They looked at these set pieces that had Logan and these characters going from A to B to C, and they've hit these checkpoints where what they stand for and the mission they're on gets challenged in some way. Maybe it's a natural way, like they come across a family who represent values that they're kind of longing for, or maybe it's a threat kind of way where the Reavers catch up to them and start shooting them out, like in the casino, which was a great scene, but it felt like it just happened for no reason, and then we move on like it didn't happen. It was like to push Xavier's backstory a little, That was kind of,
Right.
and the threat of him, it felt like that was what it was there for, and not much else. But I get the general desire with these points, but the connecting thread between each, the action that takes us there, each one of them feels, we're reaching. We could have found a more logical way to get to where we wanted to go, and have that mean something than just sort of, and then there's a car, and then the horses get out, and then Xavier's like, we should go and hang out with them for a while.
He's a literal horse whisperer in this case.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so let me put this to you then. With everything that you've just said, with all the filler that you're there, is the title of the film appropriate to you? Is the fucking movie about Logan?
Absolutely not. No, it ends with Logan. It was something funny we were discussing, like, what does this mean for Logan? Before the show, we were discussing the depression that kind of sets in with how this character finally goes.
Right.
His role in these films has always been something of a messenger boy. He's always been the middle guy between the plot and the civil politics, and the only real time it ever took the focus to him and his actual story, and that just be the story, was the Wolverine. And even then, it just goes all X-Men by the end. You know,
the third act, it's just X-Men.
Absolutely. But I mean, at least that was a story about Wolverine, and it had nothing to do with the X-Men or the bigger picture. It was just about that character. This is the story they want to tell about the human being, and what all these stories build to is this interpretation of a character. And again, he's just a messenger guy. He's just another guy.
Thing, isn't it?
It's the exact same plot as he. It's the exact same role he plays in all the other films. He's always between the bigger picture, and he's always just ferrying people from one place to the other. But then that was funny, because then we looked at it and said, like, well, maybe that's the perfect way to send off this interpretation of the character. You know? End as you started, you know.
Exactly. Be the guy in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Middleman gets his farewell, and it's depressing, because even in his own film, in a film titled after him, it's not about him. That to me is very sad. Sadder than the fact that he actually dies in this is the fact that he's never really, he's never had a real chance to have any time to grow as a character, and then suddenly we're done with him, and he's in the grave. You know, that's depressing.
As stellar as Jackman is in this part, I think that this is where you can literally see that he's poured everything he's had to pour into this performance as James Howlett, Logan, and the Wolverine. I mean, that's great. But if you look at the first X-Men film, he's a guy who doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to, help these people out. He's always getting in the way. Professor X is like, let me help you. I'll help you find out about your past. You'd be doing cage matches. They actually reference it in the fucking movie. You'd still be in Alberta beating the shit out of some dude in a cage if it wasn't for me. And then at the end, he has this father-daughter relationship with Rogue in that film as well. And we've come again to, he's got a father-daughter relationship with Laura, and so even in X2, it's about his origin, but at the same time, it's how the X-Men fit in, if Logan learns a little bit more about himself, then we'll find out a little bit more about who the X-Men are as well.
Yeah, like right? what the X-Men stand to do for you.
Exactly. Even if at the end of X2, which is a movie I really like.
Yeah.
We don't really know much more about Wolverine except for the fact that he was
an experiment
from that place.
He wasn't very happy about being an experiment. That's sad. Yeah, that's not a character. That's just a thing.
I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for First Class, and I think it's because Logan's not really in it.
Yeah, exactly. I love First Class. And
I didn't like it, and I got into a little bit of a row on Twitter for that, but
I know I really like the film, and it is true, like, because it just takes out Logan. I never really considered his absence as a factor into why I like the film, but it makes sense that we're no longer just like so tethered to this one guy who just informs where we go, but never actually matters to the payoff.
But there's a Logan character in First Class. In Magneto.
Yeah, but Magneto has an arc. Magneto actually changes throughout that film. It actually has a character. Logan never changes.
It is kind of odd
comfort
for that.
Yeah.
But Logan, essentially the character arc that Logan has in Logan is the same character arc he has in the first X-Men film, where he finally realizes that he has to contribute to the greater good.
Yeah, they've really upended the whole X-Men formula this time, that's for sure.
That's the funny thing is that, no, they've just kind of disguised it. They're like, there's our shitty old couch. Let's reupholster it.
It's so true. Well, one thing I was going to say anyway, regarding Logan as well, it was this concept I was picking up, how Logan falls into the trap of Deadpooling.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
I was thinking about, because this is now our second foray into X-Men with R ratings, and we were looking at what Deadpool did with its heritage with the X-Men, and it was trying to like parody and critique the superhero genre. But the thing about Deadpool is that by the end, it very much recommits and falls prey to those exact same conventions.
Yeah, absolutely.
The third act is a huge send-up of just the normality of superhero films, where it's just a big set piece and just action and not much else. And there's lots of great humor and sidebars in Deadpool, but it tried to pretend it wasn't just another origin story, with the fact that it's got a mixed up retelling of like a time framing for the story. And the fact that we don't really know Wade Wilson as a person before he becomes Deadpool. But that's the origin. That's the same that we learned about Peter Parker before he's Spider-Man. You know, it's just like we get a rundown of his life, and then that's him.
There's no pegging in Spider-Man. That's the difference.
That's the only difference. The only difference in Spider-Man is that there's no pegging. You're entirely right. But that's exactly. So Deadpool fell into that trap where it was trying to give a punch that it just couldn't quite muster. It was trying to be so subversive, and it fell short of actual subversion, that it was just sort of following the beats as it did. And Logan attempts here to try and do some of that regarding the X-Men. So we have a villain in a long bloodline of X-Men battling villains, and we've got an incredibly violent and gory, hard-hitting action. They're like knowing critiques, they're like nods, like, yeah, this is the old way we tell stories, but the new way, this guy gets shot. You know, I'm the bloodline guy, I'm the monologuing villain. I'm such a standard in the X-Men universe. And then, well, here's the joke. We blow his head off right there and then. You know, that's the critique, you know, and you know, the contrast of that between like the quiet, somber atmosphere and that, not even the companionship of that. That's supposed to be like, yeah, this is the harder, edgier X-Men. You know, this is the X-Men for adults, but the story it still revolves around a man with mind powers freezing time, and a man with metal blades taking super serum to fight his super clone. You know, like
super serum. It's so funny that you mentioned the super serum, because I was sitting next to Leslie in the theater. Obviously, I wasn't sitting apart from my girlfriend. Kind of an asshole would I be? You're sitting over there. I don't want you to disturb me. Anyway, so when he gets that green vial of the super serum, she just gives me a knock on the elbow, and she just leans in and whispers, "He'll drink all of it." I was like, no shit. But at the same time, I was like, he has to. And it was so funny because, you know, of course he does. My girlfriend was so invested in the film. She really, really enjoyed it, you know, and she didn't like the fact that I was picking it apart. And I was like, well, I didn't like this. She was like, shut the fuck up. This is a good movie. And I said, it's not a good movie. I'm just saying that it's not as original and thought-provoking as everyone's making it out to be.
That's what I mean. And it does. That's the thing. By trying to be that critique, it actually misses out on something that it really had going for it really well, which was its sentimentality for X-Men.
Absolutely, and for Hugh Jackman, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of love given to these characters.
Oh yeah,
and to just revel in them for one last ride. I feel that part of the film is incredibly effective, and I can imagine people who are just invested in that, like Leslie probably was, when you see you're just paying attention to Logan's misery and his problems. Then this film's a huge investment, and the film does a good job of making us really feel what he feels as we go along. You know, I can't say that it misses too many marks on just having Logan be sad. You know, like it does a good job of that, and it's very convincing and compelling. But like when it comes to the critique it's trying to mash against, it becomes kind of distracting, because now we're questioning the superhero genre, and it kind of feels like, but I thought we were reveling in Logan. And he's an X-Man, you know, he's a guy, he's one of them, you know. We should always be looking back at these comics and thinking it makes sense for Logan to go, that's not real. You know, the arc or whatever it was.
Absolutely.
Eden, sorry. And the fact they have a Wolverine doll, there's that sentimentality just pervading throughout that it really should have taken more care to take advantage of. Yep. Because it was so strong and so moving for this character to feel a part of the same world. But the attempt to distance itself from X-Men feels like we have to start challenging ourselves for liking X-Men. And there's nothing wrong. The film clearly wants it both ways. So why can't we just go all out sentimental? Why can't we just feel like invested invested in Logan and that be the story, you know, and really care about what this character is going through in this really late stage in his life. The whole poison from the adamantium thing subplot that's going on, that's sad.
I like that aspect of it. You're right. It is sad.
Yeah, and I felt like I really care for the character as to how he was, like, there's a great scene between that and that going on and Xavier's death.
Yeah.
There's this moment of Wolverine just processing his grief by just beating the shit out of this fan, and that's so good, and that's great. And
I like
the
that
film
part too. You're right.
Was very smart, and when it took the time to really invest itself in just what was happening to the characters, it did it really well, and that was one of those key examples of when it just shines.
There's another moment that I thought that the film was very clever in showing two different things. It's Laura who sees Logan. Is it the same part where he's smashing the van, or he's passed out in the street or something like that, where she actually sees a guy going fishing with a dog?
Yes.
There's those two distinct ways of how her life could play out. She could go with a father that's like that, who's basically going to take time off from whatever the hell's going on in the world and stuff like that to just go fishing and have a good time. But she also has Logan, who's actually dealing with real shit.
You know what? That's something I never even picked up on, because I was just thinking she's going to steal that car.
Oh, okay, well, possible, you know, but I read that as her looking at the two avenues her life could have had.
That's a great reading of that. I never picked up on that. That's more interesting.
But I thought that was a very human moment of hers to see, like, okay, I can go down here, you know, the road less traveled, so to speak, if you will.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, that's the kind of crises that the X-Men are famous for, this always questioning your identity, where can you draw the line to fit in, and which avenues you can choose to go down. Those are all what the X-Men are faced on a regular basis throughout their movies, right. And I'm sure in the comics. And when we start then trying to distance ourselves from X-Men, it starts feeling like you're taking yourself too seriously, trying to make the next Deadpool or something like that. And Deadpool worked because it's a comedy, you know, and
yeah.
Well, as much as it tries to distance itself from X-Men, it's actually more informed by its relationship to X-Men, and the jokes pay off because of its relationship to X-Men. So while it distances itself for humor. There's nothing to gain from Logan distancing itself from X-Men. There's nothing that would suit the character for the movie to start feeling like it has to be just a general action film and not just the next in an X-Men film.
Yeah, we're gonna distance ourselves. What's the purpose? You need to have a purpose to distance yourself, and I don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I 100% agree with that. If you're doing it for the sake of doing it, that's not a good enough reason for me either.
Yeah, exactly.
We're gonna make this gritty. We're gonna make it real. And you're like, well, okay, why? Because you can?
Yeah, and okay. They could, and Deadpool was so successful, they had to, but it feels like because of the time this film came out, we kind of got robbed a little of the actual compassionate story we should have had for Logan, which is far more involved in the character and where he comes from. Where that is what clearly the original script was, and then it's then combating against this film that's trying to be something new, when really this is an ending, so it has to be old. It has to be informed by the old with elements of the new, not trying so hard to be something that is totally different, that just happens to accidentally be unable to get away from the old.
And that's what's fun about it, because there's one little scene in the film that encapsulates all of that. Right. And it's the fact that Logan reaches for cigars in the store and doesn't smoke one at all in the film.
You're right. Totally. That's a great image.
Where you're like, we're going to do this, but we're not. You know,
yeah,
we're going to grab our cigars and light it up, but we're not going to smoke them.
It's just meeting you halfway, you know.
Exactly.
You like cigars, get it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You paint the rest of the picture.
Exactly. You deal with it. But we'll be back after this. See you in a bit.
City of stars, are you shining just for me? If you know that song, you know that's from La La Land, and that is one of the movies we will be covering on the Get Real Movies podcast. You guys can check us out on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and if you want some more great singing, tune in to Mason and I, the two youngest podcasters in the movie podcasting world. Thanks a lot.
Hey guys, this is JD from the In Session Film Podcast. Every week on our show, you can join my co-host Brendan and I as we review the latest films that's out in theaters. It also inspires us to discuss a top 3 list of some sort, and we have a lot of other fun movie discussions as well. It's always a blast. And we also have a show on Fridays called our Extra Film Podcast. This is a show that gives us the space to talk about the latest indies and art films and other classics that we normally just don't get to talk about on our main show. You can find our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Player FM, and more. In fact, you can just see everything about us, including our social medias, at InSessionFilm.com. So join us every week. We'd absolutely love to have you.
We got ourselves an X-Men fan.
Hey, Sheila.
Maybe a quarter of it happened, and not like this. In the real world, people die.
Logan.
I don't want to talk about it.
Logan.
Just stop.
Be careful. I need the girl.
What girl?
Go get her.
No. No. No.
Holy fuck.
And we're down we go, we're down we go.
She's like you. Very much like you.
So we're down we go.
I am not whatever it is you think I am.
We're down.
She needs our help.
Someone will come along.
Someone has come along. This is what life looks like. People who love each other. A home. You should take a moment. Feel it. You still have time. Two days on the road, only one meal and hardly any sleep. She's 11, I'm fucking 90.
Let's move into just general impressions so we can wind this down, because I think we talked it to death. There's not much more to say other than the fact that I think that people should go out and see it. But I do want to talk about Hugh Jackman in terms of what the state of his legacy as Wolverine. What does it say about him? Or Patrick Stewart, his legacy as Professor X. How do we feel about the way they've closed it out? Did they do them justice in this film, the way that they're doing it? They're bowing out. They're saying, this is the film we've always wanted to make. We've poured everything we had into it. And I think this is time for us to hang up the claws and the mental powers or whatever.
The brain.
The brain, yeah, hang up the brain. So, I mean, for you, how invested were you in Hugh Jackman's performance as Wolverine? Let's say from beginning to end, not just in this film, but I mean as the character himself.
I mean, I think this is the perfect end point for him, only for the fact that everything to date has been such a mishmash of quality, you know, and Logan is kind of right there in that it is not perfect, and it's not great in that it's well thought out or touching in all the ways it should be, or even an efficient script.
Right.
The beats are good, and the parts that involve really getting into the character that we all like. You could see why we're invested in this guy for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But it just feels like it's the right ending for this iteration of Wolverine.
There you go.
That doesn't mean that it's what I want, you know. It just means that that's what it is. It feels fitting. It feels fitting, and I can see why they feel like this was a fitting end, because it's got the best parts of the character somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, did I like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine? I remember sitting in the movie theater when I was 20 years old and watching this first incarnation of Wolverine on the big screen, and I was taken aback. I was like, wow. When I saw him the first time, I was like, really? This is who they chose to play Wolverine?
Yeah.
He's too tall. I mean, I had the same reaction as everybody else.
Sure.
However, upon seeing him on screen and see what he gave off as a character, I was like, wow, they really nailed it. I thought it was great, you know, and how he reacts to people. To the other mutants that are surrounding him in that universe. And I thought it was great. To see him go out the way he's going out here, absolutely. I think that his performance is stellar. I think that his grizzled look is perfect. Am I sad that he's bowing out? Not really.
Yeah.
I think it's
a pretty
kinda
good
cool
time to do it.
I'll always have those films of him being Wolverine, you know what I mean? It'll be great to see him at 70 years old and being like, you know, just posing with some blades for the next time. It'd be a weird picture, but a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. When we get the real old man Logan. Agreed. But no, yeah, you're totally right. And we have films where Wolverine got the role he really needed, you know, and his place in Days of Future Past is he's got a great role. It's very funny.
He does,
very fitting for the character. There's a lot of action scenes that really benefit his struggle with the group. And when it gets to the action of the film, where it's the X-Men actually fighting together near the end, you know, against these Sentinels, the fact that he is still kind of considered one of the weaker X-Men for just being sheerly weak to Magneto, that fits his role in the group, and it's kind of like that was a great encapsulation of what Wolverine mattered. He's like the heart of the group, but he's not the perfect companion or teammate. He's just another member. And there's something really fitting about that. And the fact that he's the guy who gets everybody together, but then can't really contribute much to the fight itself, that's very fitting for the character. And I think that's, if you were to say there's a great cutoff point for him as the Wolverine, as the character we've grown with, that I would say is more than enough to say we got a good run out of the character. Logan does a great job just bringing a natural narrative end to where this character goes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And the way it takes the original Xavier as well. I mean, I was really taken aback by his death in this film. I was very surprised. I guess the way it hit me was that it just happened. You know, he just gets killed by some fucking nobody. And it's just a couple of claw marks, and without much words left, he just kind of gaffs, bleeds out and dies without it. And the inability of Wolverine to prove it wasn't him to Xavier, that is genuinely sad. You know? And
oh, definitely, yeah.
And I feel like I don't know what to make of how that takes the civil rights character we were introduced to in the very first film. Maybe the sudden shock of the death. Wasn't he based on Martin Luther King? I mean,
yes.
So isn't there like a connection there? That to me, the sheer abrupt nature of it, there's kind of something that fits with what they initially imagined for the character. But at the same time, and it is just devastating in general on an emotional level when it comes to what it means to the characters who survive past him. But is it fitting? I don't know. It feels like this man did a lot for the series, and this is the way it goes. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I think this is a natural ending point for them as characters, as actors in this franchise. Would I have wanted something better for Professor X? Yeah, I think so. I think he deserved better, especially seeing as that he had given so much.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that he's going out the way he goes out by some chicken shit move from some nameless assassin.
Exactly.
You're like, you know, but at the same time, it is fitting given the fact that what you just put forward, you know, the fact that it's Martin Luther King.
Yeah, and if they just kill him in like a great ceremonious way, then it kind of robs a lot of the impact of it, you know, the shock that you just didn't think Professor X could just go, you know.
Yeah, but it's also a sacrifice, I think. If you look at it, I mean, if we want to just really pick it apart, Caliban sacrifices himself ultimately to say, I'm not going to be your sniffing dog, but like you said, it doesn't really amount to much because they could just clone him again, and you know they can actually find them because there's a homing beacon
and drones.
You know, they're like, and drones. Yeah, they're like, well, why the fuck did you take Caliban and not just shoot him right away? And then you know you'll have Professor X essentially whose entire life was a sacrifice, you know, and trying to like get equal rights for the X-Men and stuff like that, you know, but even putting himself out there and saying, we need to protect this girl. He was the first one to sacrifice himself in order to get Laura on board. And he, as stubborn as Logan is, you know, Professor X needed to keep telling him, dude, come on, you gotta get with the program now. This is your time to shine. Let's go. Let's get on the road. She's your daughter.
That's
you gotta
right.
come on. You know, so he's essentially the kick out the door Gandalf gives Bilbo and Frodo in the same thing. You know?
Yeah, you're right. Totally right.
So, I mean, there are these three distinct sacrifices, which, you know, to me doesn't bode well for where Episode 8 might go in Star Wars, where I'm like, oh, they've already killed Solo. What are they going to do with Luke next?
Apparently we could take anybody now.
There's a pattern now that's being established where we're like, you see these guys that you used to like? They're all dying.
You're old.
Reminding
You're
me
old
that
and
I'm
everyone
getting
you
older.
loved is going to die.
Exactly. It's just positive imagery. And some of the movies that I want to take my daughters to see are like, see how inspiring life is? It all ends in death. Have a good night.
The sooner you learn that, the more you can do in that time.
Spoken like a true old man. Shut the fuck up.
I guess, right, so other general likes. I liked how they handled Professor X's Alzheimer's. I think, that it's like this manifestation of the sort of knock-on effect that it can affect even your loved ones. Mm-hmm. And it's something completely out of control of the character.
Yeah, to be able to visually translate that was good.
Yeah, great visual translation of that to the mutant world. It makes it all the more powerful that it has literally the power to kill people. It may be a little overblown, I guess, a little melodramatic, but then that's what it always is with X-Men. It's always a little theatrical. But I still think it sticks as an interesting image. I was like, yeah, Professor X, that's what happens to him when he goes old. That could happen to me,
Yeah, but I thought at the same time, you could also make a case for it being psychosomatic. The fact that he's forgetting is him trying to struggle with the fact that he might have actually committed this atrocity in his own school, and that's the I would say the result. The fact that his memory is fading is a choice. You could actually play in that vein if you want to as well, where he's like, I don't want to remember anymore. Because once Laura shows up, he does snap back into reality.
Yeah, that's true.
So, just how much of it is psychosomatic.
I would worry that some people will walk away from it thinking that Alzheimer's is something that people just sort of snap out of. That would be an unintentional, I imagine, message that people would walk away from, because it definitely doesn't work that way.
Yeah, perhaps. Last positives for me, I mean, I really appreciated the tone of the film. I like the color palette as well. I thought the action was really well done.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I especially like the fact that there, as not subversive as it was in terms of narrative, there are a couple elements in the film that I thought were kind of fun, and we were talking about it briefly just before we recorded. One of my favorite sequences was the fact that the limousine hits the fence and it doesn't break through.
Yeah.
It was kind of a fun one where he had to go back into reverse and actually pull the fence down. Normally when you're watching a movie, they're going to crash through gates. Everything's going to open magically for them. But this time around, it was going to take a little bit more effort. And I think that it speaks to the movie as a whole, where we're like, you got to push a little bit harder this time, or you got to go back in reverse. We got to go back to where we came from in order to go move forward,
But then he does use the old get over the train line trick. So that kind of undoes that good favor.
Yeah, well, I was going to get to that, and I'm glad you pointed it out. But you're like, they kind of did use the train, which is typical of Westerns.
Absolutely, they can't get past that. Look, the train just happens to go on for like 400 miles.
Exactly. It was like, we've got a lot of time to kill. They could have actually had supper there and not been a threat.
That's writing roadblocks. That was just writers trying to figure out, how do we end this action scene? Put a train in. Which turned
into a literal roadblock in the film. I like the action, most of it. I think that for some reason, seeing Wolverine stab people in the head was cool a lot.
Yeah, that's all I ever really wanted. This is what the whole podcast was about, is that I just wanted to get to the point to say, I just liked Wolverine stabbing people in the head.
Exactly.
Couldn't we have had a film of that?
X2, yeah, the berserker rages that we had seen so far weren't necessarily that great. I mean, there was the one in X-Men 2 where, you see the claws, and then you see a guy get pulled from one side. He stabs him through the feet. He stabs him through the chest. You never see him really scratch anyone in the face or through the heart or anything like that. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's not as gory as everyone's making it out to be, and I don't know if that's because I'm Canadian and so is Wolverine, and we share some sort of background.
I think it was the funny kind of gory, like the just enough to add a real punch to the physical action that's being done,
right,
or being portrayed, but not enough to really, avert your gaze. It's nothing like that. And I think that was something that John Wick 2 did in the last episode. I think it did pretty well as well. It was that we could see the blows that were coming in each time. That makes the connection of that action is great, and it is important to reiterate that it did a really good job with the fact that these films can just go straight to R and just phone in or throw in some crap and try to justify it just by being edgy. But somebody actually thought out much of this. They've kind of choreographed what actually happened. Somebody has actually sat down and worked this out in what is a lot of interesting visual ways. I think one of them, the sort of casino, the slow motion climbing into the room and just poking these guys through the head as you try to help Xavier. This is great.
I love that scene. Yeah,
it was really fun to watch, and I mean, it was gross, but it was fun to watch. You know,
I didn't find it gross, man. I don't know what the hell, but there was some sort of appeal for me there. To me, it was like it's about fucking time we see what kind of damage Wolverine can inflict. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Everyone's saying like it's the goriest thing. I was like, nah, go watch a Takashi Miike film, and you'll see what gory looks like.
Gory on a scale of X-Men, certainly, definitely. But I still thought Deadpool was way gorier. Like the bone breaking and his arms falling off and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely
was also
right.
funnier, but was way more inventive with what it did. Yeah, exactly.
What's your favorite part of the film?
I guess I really loved the intro. I think it set the right tone where he's at the limo and these guys just a set on there. It was really all I ever actually wanted to see. The story we got was good, and I did feel like connected and interested in the scenes that were emotional, especially the grieving scene. I thought was incredible. But for me, just watching Wolverine, just that first instinct of watching him just absolutely get enraged. He asks them, and then somebody shoots the car, and then he just goes nuts and starts tearing them to pieces.
But he blocks the bullets, you know, with his chest too. Boom, and they just
yeah, exactly.
That was so
just
cool.
Super fun scene. That it seemed in character, and the action to it was just very memorable. It kicked off the film in just the right tone. I was really invested from that point forward.
But it also tells you exactly like where Logan is as an individual.
Visual
like,
shorthand.
Exactly. It was like, okay, he has to literally throw himself in front of the car to protect the car because that's the way he makes his money. And he's willing to take the bullet for it because he can't afford to repair the car and he can repair it himself. That's, you know, my car is worth more than I am, motherfucker.
Great. What would you say was your favorite part?
Laura.
Oh, well, yeah, that's an incredible performance.
Laura was great. I think that her introduction, the fact that she's wrestling with Logan with the bag when she's sitting down and eating her cereal, and you can see just the amazed gaze that Professor X, you know, Charles has on his face, just staring at her going like,
yeah.
They're still there, that we still have hope, you know? And then once there's that action sequence when they send in those 3 guys, and then she's able to sneak around, you can tell that she's got a lot of experience.
Yeah.
At defending herself, she's had to like really kind of stay alert throughout that entire time. You can see that there's that wild child side to her that was brilliantly executed by that Daphne. She was so good. And you know, when she just comes out and chucks the head, I was like, that's brilliant. That was just a little added touches like, you guys are next. Your move. It's like throwing the ball in your court.
Even the reveal of like the foot claw was fucking hilarious. I
like that. Yeah,
I thought it was a great addition, and they explain it well in
the
Xavier explains it.
There?
Yeah, I thought that's a very inventive thing to do for that character. I thought that was very fun.
Yeah, so I think Laura, and just like when they're in the car, when she's literally punching Logan in the face. I thought that was
totally
great.
proud about it. That's very real, isn't it?
I loved it. You know, it's a little wake up, dummy. Bang. You know, this isn't about you. This is about keeping us alive. Snap into it. You know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even though I felt at times that the idea that she was mute for the first part, but then speaks later on, I felt that was contrived enough to be distracting. That they just didn't approach that as a language barrier from the beginning, instead of just pretending she was mute at first. I mean, at first I get it because she's uncomfortable. It isn't too irrational as a character change. That after Xavier goes, she feels she has to own up, and there's a fun little joke about it, even from the family that they're with. You know, like you just want them to stay quiet, so that when she does start talking and just rhyming off Spanish right at Logan, then he starts going stop. You know, right off the bat. But I still feel like it felt like the writers were making up for the fact that they just wanted a reason for Xavier to be a part of the conversation. And I feel that if they committed to her just being mute, it would have challenged them to make a story that actually has a mute character, you know, and have the relationship try to grow through that. I think that would have been the potential there was really interesting, and we never really got it.
I don't know, man. I think that, to me, the way I read that was that this is where she actually starts becoming the voice of the voiceless. You know, the fact that there's this generation of kids that are going to be coming up in a world where no one can speak up for their rights, she actually has a voice. She actually gives a voice to the new mutants, if you will.
Sure.
And if you look at the generational gap that there is, sometimes there's going to be miscommunication. And the fact that they chose Spanish, I thought was clever in showing that there's going to be a clear divide. And they're going to have to find a way to communicate, which goes to speak out to the larger themes of what was going on in the United States, obviously. But that aspect of becoming the voice of the voiceless. You know, she literally has that impact for me when she actually just starts spouting out onto Logan. Logan can't speak child and he can't speak Spanish and he lives in Mexico, where you're like, shouldn't you have kind of tried to learn about that other culture?
Shouldn't you have adapted? That's something,
You know, so I thought that was kind of interesting for them.
I think that's very fair.
Way. But
I think that's fair. I mean, I had this feeling of like, this was supposed to be action is stronger than words kind of thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that you're right in that the middle ground of being both voice and action is very X-Men. That kind of fits in with what they go for. You know, they aren't the extremists like the Mutant Brotherhood who actually have to constantly use violence to get their message heard.
Right.
They have action to defend themselves and a voice to speak to people. So yeah, I think that ties in nicely with what you're saying about the next generation. I think that's a good idea. Fair enough. Criticism rescinded.
I guess that's it for me. I'll just close out by saying I really, I'm coming around to it. You know, my initial reaction, like I said, I had a lot. I was confused and conflicted as to how I wanted to feel about Logan. I'm coming around to it. I know that I'm going to feel more positive towards it once I've sat down and watched it, you know, a second and third time. Because it's not that I know what it is, but I think that it becomes difficult to keep an open mind amongst the criticism. You know, people get these advanced screenings, and I try to stir away from that. But everybody comes out and says it's great, it's fantastic, it's a masterpiece and all that stuff, and you're kind of like, come on, man, I gotta kind of get off social media a little bit, but it's hard because we want to promote the show, and I like being in contact
we have
with
to
people.
do the show.
It's kind of fun. So I mean, I think that if I were to, I don't want to rank it in terms of where it fits in terms of the X-Men universe. I mean, if I go for personal preference, I mean, I've always thought that X-Men 2, you know, X2, X-Men United, spoke very clearly. It was a very X-Men film with an underlying message, obviously, and I thought that movie executed it a little bit better than most of the X-Men films that came after. Days of Future Past was one that kind of talked about civil rights in a way as well, you know, where we were talking about, you know, the struggle for gay rights and whatnot earlier in the show. I do think that Logan fits nice and neatly amongst those three, and if I were to tell people to watch X-Men films, I would definitely put Logan in that trio.
Yeah.
I would say if you want to see what X-Men are really about, you'll have distinct messages in X-Men 2, Days of Future Past, and Logan. I wasn't a fan of First Class, and it's not.
That's fine. It's kind of like it's more like what I like. It's kind of like a fun character soap opera, but very little, very very weak on the messaging, more about just the characters, and I like it for that. I just like spending time with these people and their relationships.
Sure.
But it in no way tries to be as big as the messaging in, say, X-Men 2, which is, I think, for all intents and purposes, the most, you know, succinct X-Men experience that you're going to get.
Yeah. And so that's it. So, I mean, that would be the one, you know, and I'm not going to rank them as order of favorites. I say if you were to watch 3 X-Men films.
Yeah. I think that's, you know, a very
Logan
broad range as well. I think that makes sense. You know, it's basically, you know, these are the flavors of X-Men. You know, you can get the sort of future one, there's the pure-hearted X-Men 2, and then you got Logan, which just sort of see what happens when they kind of do one of their characters alone, but they do it right, you know. And it also, that sort of arc of those 3 films cuts out much of the fluff in between. That's really the important beats are all in those 3. It's fine. I think that's a very fair ranking. But on Logan, I think this is a very good X-Men film. I'm a fairly decent fan of the series by now. I've even liked Apocalypse, and you like that too, to be fair. Even the worst film in the series, the X-Men Origins, I have this little soft spot in my heart for it. It's just so bad it's good. I put it on with a couple of drinks and some friends, and we just laugh line after line. So even bad X-Men has a place. X-Men 3 never offended me. It just wasn't very good. So where Logan kind of comes in, it does a good job with the character. It's kind of middled as a story, but it's an easy recommendation for those who have been along for the ride so far. And it actually doesn't. It's not too bad as a film, as a standalone. It doesn't feel like it would suffer too much if this is your first X-Men film. So
no, that's it. My girlfriend had never watched any of the other X-Men films.
Really,
and she came out of this one and said, "I really like this. This was good. I didn't need any of the backstory because it was kind of peppered throughout. That these people had a history. It felt like a very lived-in world. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, well, there we go. So yeah. I think if you haven't seen an X-Men film, Logan is like you said, it's one of the three that you should definitely see. I would agree with you that the three you named, I think First Class, while it actually is my favorite of them, it's definitely a preference thing, and I don't want to try to justify it as a great movie. I just think it's got a lot of the things I love to see in comic book movies. Logan, it's a little more serious, it's a little more in line with the original vision of the cinematic X-Men films, and it feels like a solid successor and final note for this character in the form we know him as, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we do now with the Wolverine character. I want to see. I would be glad for us to leave him behind for a bit, maybe focus on Laura.
Yeah,
I think he's got a lot of films under his belt. He's by far I enjoy the character. I love the performance that Hugh Jackman gives for him, but at the same time, I've never felt connected enough to say he's like a favorite. That's very strange.
On the comics, I used to love him. He was one of my favorites. I mean,
he's
I like
very funny. I like him when he's used as comedic, and that's where Days of Future Past is great, because he plays more of a comedic role, just getting everybody together and telling them to shut the fuck up and get on with their day job. That's how that character really comes in and nails it, and it's when we actually have to learn about his tragic, tortured existence that we kind of go like, I don't care.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, Logan, fine film, absolutely.
I can't even believe we're actually telling people to go see it, because technically speaking, we obviously talk spoilers and shit like that. So
doesn't matter. People do it anyway.
We endorse Logan, is what we're saying. Is we endorse this as a film. It's a very good exercise in filmmaking. I thought it was really good. The characters, they come to a natural conclusion, in my opinion. So yeah,
great.
So shall we close this off, sir?
Let's do it, man.
Cool. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. My name was Jason Michael. You can reach me on Twitter at film_faculty. Be sure to go and subscribe to our show, the AtlanticSC Podcast, or the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast, on Stitcher Radio. We're also on iTunes. We'd appreciate if you guys leave a comment there and a rating, and also on SoundCloud. We chose SoundCloud obviously because we like you guys commenting on the tracks, so please go feel free to comment on those tracks. And thanks again for tuning in. Lee?
Yep. You can find me at Big Pic Reviews on Twitter, and you can check out my website, bigpicturereviews.co.uk. We got a new writer this week, a longtime friend of mine, Aisling. She's joined in. She did a review for Hidden Figures. Yep. So it's great. First review was a great review. So and I wanted to say a shout out to David Hart, who sent us some great feedback this week. About the show, and it really was. It's very important that people do tell us what you think about the show, so that we can better ourselves as the entertainers we purport ourselves to be. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. That was absolutely great of him to do that, because not only did Pop Culture Case Study was one of the shows that I had actually started listening to before I started podcast. I'm a fan.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be able to interact and get feedback from a guy whose opinions you respect enormously meant so much to me. And then I forwarded the messages to you, and you were like, "Holy shit, this is awesome!"
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let's just
over the moon about it. So I mean, I think it's great that if you feel that the show ticks enough boxes, you think we're doing something right or something wrong, you let us know, and we'll absolutely happy to address it, whether we feel that what we do is the right thing or the wrong thing, or we're just going to stick with it anyway and ignore you. That's all a part of life.
So that's it for us for this week. We want to thank you guys again for tuning in. Be on the lookout, like I said, for the giveaway. And by the way, we're going to start having a few more guests on the show.
Yeah. Hopefully from next week.
Coming up on the next episode, we're going to be talking to Nerd on Nerd, most likely, for the Kong Skull Island, which is going to be a fun time.
Absolutely.
Because I really like those guys. They're funny as hell. And big shout out to Yuche, because we're going to be starting a new show.
Yeah,
we haven't really pieced it all together yet, but at the same time, we want to go back to the one week format, and we decided to expand our What Did You Watch This Week segment into its own 30-minute to 35-minute show, or 45-minute show, I should say. And that's it. We actually wanted to have Yuche on the show, so stay tuned for him as well. I don't know if it's going to be coming out before or after the Kong Skull Island episode.
It will be after
the show.
After the show.
And so that's it. So stay tuned for all that. We're going to keep you updated. Keep interacting with us on Twitter, and it's going to be great. And so I guess that's it for this week.
That's us.
All right. Take care.
See you now. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.